Hi there, and welcome to The Daily Gardener, an almanac of garden history, literature, and small botanical joys. I'm Jennifer Ebling, and today is April 22nd. April 22nd carries a big modern name, Earth Day. But in the garden, the earth does not show up as a slogan. It shows up as a presence, a dampness on your fingertips, a scent you recognize before you can describe it. And maybe that is the quiet gift of this date, a reminder that some of the most lasting human moments have unfolded not in lecture halls or on stages, but in gardens themselves. Intended places where oranges perfume the air and where a walled patch of green can hold a whole life steady. Here's today's garden history. It was on this day in 1684 that the Swedish queen, Christina of Sweden, was hosting an event in her garden in Italy. Christina had already stepped away from one kind of power. She had abdicated the throne of Sweden, crossed borders, changed faith, and remade her life in Rome. There, Christina gathered something different around her: music, ideas, rare plants, and the kind of conversation that can only happen when people have time and when a garden gives them somewhere to walk while they talk. That day, April 22nd in 1684, Christina hosted a jousting competition right inside her garden. It was called the Noble Game of Bisha, a serpent-shaped ring suspended in the air, and riders charged toward it, trying to pass their lance cleanly through. The event took place at the garden of Palazzo Corsini on Via della Lungura in Trastevere. Christina watched it all from above, with 8 cardinals standing beside her, scarlet and black, looking down into the green. This garden was not only clipped hedges and symmetry. It held native oranges and lemons, rare exotics brought in with care, and entire sections left almost wild. That looseness was intentional. It allowed structure and improvisation to live side by side. And the garden was not quiet. Christina's world held music the way a greenhouse holds heat. Inside the palazzo, the air could be full of composers like Arcangelo Corelli and Alessandro Scarlatti, while outdoors serenatas drifted into the evening. The garden became a stage, a laboratory, and a refuge. Christina died in Rome on January 19th, 1689. She was 62 years old and was buried in St. Peter's Basilica, a rare honor. There are only 3 women buried there. And it was on this day, in 1748, that the Swedish botanist Pehr Kalm visited the Chelsea Physic Garden in London, England. As a young man, Pehr was a devoted pupil of Carl Linnaeus, sent outward into the world to collect, observe, and return with proof. But before Pehr could cross the Atlantic, he got stuck in England, not for a day or two, but for months. There was no ship available. While he waited, Pehr kept a diary, and he let patterns emerge slowly. He wrote about the Physic Garden on this day with the clear-eyed respect of someone who knew plants and knew what it took to keep a living collection alive. He called it one of the principal gardens in Europe, and he noted its keeper, Philip Miller, the man responsible for its living order. Pehr's evening didn't end there, though. He found himself in the company of George Edwards, the secretary of the Royal Society and an earnest ornithologist. Pehr wrote that George's bird illustrations looked so lifelike, he believed they could fly off the page. He also described the land around Chelsea given over to nurseries and vegetable plots, all in an effort to feed the vast appetite of London. Pehr's journal is a quiet reminder that garden history is not only about beauty, it's also about infrastructure, commerce, medicine, and sustenance. Pehr eventually crossed the Atlantic. He spent 3 years traveling through colonial America and Canada and returned to Sweden with hundreds of specimens. Pehr died in 1779 at the age of 61. His book, Travels into North America, became a foundational text in the natural history of the continent. In today's Unearthed Words, we hear a line about happiness from the American novelist Ellen Glasgow, born on this day in 1873. Ellen was born in Richmond, Virginia, into a world that loved old stories that were polished and romantic and safe. But Ellen wrote differently. She wrote with realism, with blood and irony, instead of moonlight and magnolias. In her novel, Barren Ground, the heroine does not find restoration in romance. She finds it in exhausted fields, in repetition, in patience, and in the long belief that what looks spent can still be revived. And Ellen leaves us with this question, plain and almost disarming. Where was happiness if it sprung not from the soil? Ellen wrote those words in 1925 when she was 52 and still gardening in Richmond. She died 20 years later at her desk in the house where she had always lived, with her garden just outside the window. It's time to grow that garden library with today's book, Gardens That Can Save the World by Lottie Delamain. This book is part of Flora and Flowers Week here on The Daily Gardener, and that means that all of this week's book recommendations are devoted to flowers and the living work they are already doing all around us. Lottie Delamain is a gardener and a garden writer, and her book unfolds like a long walk through 65 gardens from around the world. Each one offers us a glimpse of what's possible when planting becomes a form of repair, not protection. There are gardens that catch water instead of letting it rush away, gardens that cool heat, and gardens that soften noise. There are also specialty gardens that make room for pollinators, children, and neighbors. Lottie's underlying argument is generous and true. You do not have to own acres of land to have a garden, a bed, a window box, or a simple patch of ground. All of it counts, and all of it is already part of something larger. And finally, here's something sweet to ignite the little botanic spark in your heart. It was on this day in 1943 that the American poet Louise Glück was born. In 1991, Louise had gone quiet. Not professionally quiet, but creatively still, in a way she could not explain. Years had passed since her last collection. The poems were not coming. Then a friend offered her a house for the summer, a simple place in Plainfield, Vermont, with a garden out back. Louise sat with it. She walked it in the mornings. She watched what was there: iris, wild things, and the shapes of what had been planted by someone else long before. And then, in 2 months, she wrote an entire book. Louise called it The Wild Iris. In it, the flowers speak. They remember burial, pressure, and the shock of light. They say what many of us feel standing in the spring garden, trying to name gratitude and fear in the same breath. The Wild Iris won the Pulitzer Prize in 1993. 27 years later, Louise won the Nobel Prize for Literature. But for Louise, the greatest gift was the time she spent in a borrowed garden in Vermont, a quiet place that broke a long silence and gave her back her voice. As we close the show today, remember, On this Earth Day, the world can be a loud place, but the earth itself is often quiet. If you visit your garden today, no matter how briefly, just take the opportunity to sit with it, like Louise did, and see what comes back. Memories, little moments, and maybe even transformation. Thanks for listening to The Daily Gardener, and remember, for a happy, healthy life, garden every day.